Welcome to our Election 2016 Forum organized by the League of Women Voters of Greater Las Cruces. I'm Fred Martino. Today we focus on the unopposed races in the New Mexico legislature. From the House, Doreen, Gallegos, and Bill Gomez. And from the Senate, we have with us Joseph Cervantes, Ron Griggs, and John Arthur Smith. Candidates will have 1 minute to respond to each question. The questions were submitted to the League by the public. We asked the studio audience to refrain from any noise during the forum. I'm joined by Gwen Hansen, president of the League, and she has our first question.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. The first question is for Representative Gallegos. Do you support physician assistance in dying? Yes or no, and why?
I do. My background is in social work, and I've worked in hospitals where I've seen people with pretty severe illnesses, and I've seen them want to hang on to their dignity. And I feel that if they have the mental capability to make some of those decisions to help them in their own lives and have doctors counsel them through that process, and whether it's a therapist or a social worker or somebody in the mental health field to also check in with them so they make a conscious decision and they can be in charge of how they end their lives. And I feel that it's really important to give people that dignity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Same question, Representative Gomez.
Well, I'm in favor of it because I've seen, unfortunately, our family's been in the emergency rooms, we've been in intensive care, and you sit there and you watch people that have no life. So why do they keep them there? Give them a chance to decide when it's their time. And that's basically how I feel, is that people need to have that opportunity. It's their decision, and they don't want to sit there and suffer anymore, because most people, when they get to that point, they are very sick, and all they're doing is suffering, and it's not helping anybody. It doesn't help the family, and doesn't help them.
Thank you. Senator Cervantes.
We have a terrific medical community, and we should rely upon their advice and their wisdom in doing so. So yes, I support physicians being able to practice medicine, and that means allowing physicians to use all of their skills and all their tools in helping patients through the last part of their lives. We spend too much of our, frankly, of our funding in healthcare in the latter part of people's lives. A disproportionate amount of money is spent keeping people alive really beyond their own wishes and perhaps what doctors might recommend for them. So I think people should be able to make that decision working with their doctors and in their privacy of their own decision-making process.
Thank you. Senator Griggs.
You know, I'm afraid I'm getting closer to that every day, but I don't know that it's something that I actually support yet. I go to the Aristocrat in Alamogordo, where my mother lives, and I see a variety of people there, and I know that it's going to be challenging at one point in time for us when we face that more with mother. But I'm not sure that we don't already have means with hospice care and other things where people do have that opportunity to make some decisions if that's the way they so choose. But to make any changes in that, I'm not sure I'm ready to say I would support it without knowing exactly what sort of changes we intend to make.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
You know, that's a very personal question with me. We're talking about the end of life here. Mm-hmm. I have a personal experience where I had a brother that was injured in a car accident at 16 years old in 1952, and he was totally and completely comatose until he died in 1960. So I watched it from my mother's side, always holding out hope that he would come through. And I watched it from the physician's side, where he was so dedicated to reassuring my parents, because he would come every evening to check on my brother. With the technologies with what they are right now, we look back on it and we knew that there was no hope. I go back to my brother, made the remark a few days before this accident when one of his friends was paraplegic, and he told his family, he said, if something like that happens to me, I don't want to be assisted in living. But it's a real mixed question and issue within my own family. Mm-hmm. Jimmy Smith was before Karen Quinlan, And so it has a deeper meaning and depends on the circumstances.
Thank you.
We continue with another very controversial question. It's a question a number of states have dealt with, including Colorado, and it was another excellent question submitted by the public. We do appreciate all of your question submissions. Do you support allowing voters to decide on the legal sale of recreational marijuana in New Mexico? And again, it's a very specific question. It's not whether you personally support the sale of recreational marijuana. It's whether you support allowing voters to decide on its sale, yes or no, and why. And for this question, we begin with Representative Gomez.
Well, you know, that is an important question that we have to face sometime. I really push for the hemp bill because I think that's a step that's needed in agriculture to help our communities. The cannabis bill, I actually signed on to it because I think it's something we have to look at in New Mexico. You look over at Colorado, they're making a fortune off of taxes off of it. Here we're sitting supporting all the cartels and all these other people that are selling marijuana. Why should we do that and not tax them? That's kind of where I stand, and I think one of these days, yeah, the public should be allowed to decide, and that's who should decide, not us as representatives. We just give them the chance to do that. Thank you.
Senator Cervantes.
Well, I'd probably disagree with the idea that we leave these issues to the voters in all cases. As leaders, elected officials, our job is to represent the issues, to study the issues, and make an informed decision on behalf of the public. I'm not really sure why this one particular issue would be different than the way we handle other things. I think the legislature and the elected officials should be in a position to make that decision and live by that decision. I'm happy to say that I passed the legislation through the Senate to decriminalize use of marijuana. We shouldn't be putting people in prisons and taxing the public resources for possession of small amounts, and I think that's a good, important first step. But I don't oppose the idea of putting it on the ballot, but I don't know why we would have to begin to delegate away our responsibility as elected officials in doing so.
Senator Griggs.
You know, I believe that it's our decision to make as well. I think that right now, I believe if you look at any polls, any questions that have been put to the public already, where they have substantial numbers who believe that marijuana should be legalized for recreational use. But I think what we have to do is when we talk about writing laws, we have to write laws that address all parts of the legalization issue. It's not just a simple decision for us to say, well, okay, it's now legal. There's got to be far more to it. And so as a body, as an elected body, we can then debate all of those things to be sure that the law we write is a good law for the citizens of New Mexico. We faced a while back with the PRC, where we had a PRC question where they had to then meet certain qualifications. And we were under the gun to write legislation for that. And I believe the legislation we wrote could be better and would be better had we addressed it in that manner.
Okay. Senator Smith.
You know, I go along with Senator Cervantes. That's a decision that should be determined at the legislative level. I'm not an advocate for the referendum process. I'm not certain it did well for California, nor do I think it does well in general for Colorado on that. But I think that we're elected not to be making decisions by what is popular, but should be elected on the basis of doing what is responsible. We have a lot of hurdles to cross. We have to remember, even if it's legalized here by the public, it is still contrary to federal law. And I would like to see the federal determination being made before we move in that direction and put our young people and other people in jeopardy because they are being charged under the federal act rather than state law.
And Representative Gallegos.
I have to say I agree with my colleagues. I really do believe it's a legislative decision. I think that we should be getting feedback from our constituents. As a mother of someone that's 12 years old, you know, I want us to be thoughtful, And so I want us to make sure that when we do put a law out, that we've thought through the process, that we've debated it in committees and on the floor, and that we've looked at both sides of the coin. And that way we can come to consensus and pass it through the House and then through the Senate if that's what needs to happen. But I think it has to be a thoughtful decision, and I feel that that's a decision that the people have elected us to make.
Okay.
Thank you.
The third question begins with Senator Cervantes. How would you provide incentives for businesses to relocate to our state, if any?
Well, I think the most important thing for us is to have a short-term strategy and a long-term strategy for attracting businesses here. It seems like we always focus on the short-term strategies. We do things to bring a business in the short term with some kind of a tax incentive or otherwise, and they come around long enough to take advantage of the tax incentive, and then when the incentive goes away, they find the next tax incentive someplace else and move along with it. Your question was what do we do to bring businesses here? I think really our focus should be on trying to build the businesses that are here. Too oftentimes we try and bring businesses here and it's a short-term gain again. We have a lot of businesses here that are never going to go anywhere else. The core is a New Mexico business, and we should be trying to strengthen those. And I think in building those businesses, they in turn will bring other businesses here to New Mexico. We live close to Texas, and we see very well how Texas is doing in terms of building their own local economy. And they're doing a lot of that not necessarily by bringing new businesses in, but strengthening the businesses that are there.
Thank you. Senator Griggs.
Thank you. You know, and in talking with people in Alamogordo, which is where I'm from, one of the bigger concerns about this type of issue is the fact that the state of New Mexico has a lot of regulation on doing business in our state, whether it's for the guy that's here or the guy that's coming in. And it's important to me that we address the regulations that we have allowed to be adopted and are impacting the businesses that are here. And then the businesses that want to be here, when they see the amount of regulation that our businesses are subjected to, then they say, well, you know, heck, why should I consider New Mexico? Why should I consider New Mexico when taxes are higher in New Mexico? Why should I consider New Mexico when issues that relate to tort reform are better in other states? You know, we just need to do some of those things that make our state a little more competitive, and they deal with regulation initially, and we use the reforms that we've enacted.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
You know, first and foremost, I've been heavily involved in trying to diversify the economy of this state and have worked with the administration in trying to structure a tax method that might be appealing to additional businesses in the state of New Mexico. But I classify that as supply side economics. And quite frankly, I started out my life thinking it needed to be percolated up, and then I listened to the supply side trickle down, and now I've concluded that we need a little of both. But what allows us to do both? It's been the oil and gas industry that's generating extra dollars for us, that in the event we miscalculated on what the return or what the cost was going to be, that oil and gas was there to back us up. We no longer have those revenues from oil and gas. What I do know is that we need a plan that is not changing all the time, and as a result we need to communicate reliability and consistency to businesses across the state, and I think that's probably the most responsible thing to do.
Thank you. Representative Gallegos.
You know, I really believe that we need to look at our resources here. We need to promote local and small businesses, and we need to look at our education systems. And I think if we work all those together, we can really promote our economy and growing that here. You know, there's so many times that we have small businesses that just can't make it. I run a nonprofit, and so I see how payroll taxes are high and how there's so many loopholes for big businesses that really aren't invested in staying in New Mexico. And so what I'd like to see us do is reform the tax code, make it more attractive for New Mexicans to be able to sustain a business, for our graduates from NMSU and people around the state who have graduated college from this area to be able to stay here, because I think that's part of what we're investing in these students, but then they have to go somewhere else to find jobs. And if we can somehow grow our economy and grow our students to keep them here, I think that that's a good thing for New Mexico.
Thank you. Representative Gomez.
Well, I'm on several economic development type committees, and all I hear is we don't have the trained workforce. We need to really emphasize the community colleges. I went over to Tucumcari, and they're working on windmills. That's very necessary here in the state right now. They're building them all over. We went to Farmington, and they were working with the oil industry. And, you know, that's where we've got to spend the time and the effort, is training our people for jobs that are here or that are going to be brought here to the state. And I think that's where we need to start putting our emphasis. We do need to help small business. We need to look at these regulations, but it's the students that we have to develop. We've got to have trained people. You know, everybody wants to attack the unions. Have you ever gone to a union hall and see what they do for their people? They train them. That's why we have a trained workforce. You go to Albuquerque to the union hall, it's magnificent. They have one here, the Carpenters Union here in Las Cruces. I've toured several of them because I want to know what is it that they bring to the table. So we need to support things like this that get us a trained workforce. That's where we really will improve the state of New Mexico.
Well, the economy, of course, is such an important issue in the state of New Mexico right now. We want to give all of our senators and representatives a chance to expand on this a bit. The last question dealt with incentives. This one is much more broad. It's about as broad as it could be. What should the state legislature do to improve the economy in New Mexico? And Senator Griggs, we begin with you.
You know, our economy in New Mexico is, you know, it struggles a little bit because it's so dependent on oil and gas. And when oil and gas goes south, our economy goes south. So what can New Mexico do? And it's issues like that that I believe all of us have talked with other colleagues about and people across our districts. You know, and I think we need to do those things like we mentioned, like a lot of these guys have mentioned so far. But I think maybe we need to look at some other things. We need to look at things that are businesses really, should that really be our focus? Should we be looking at bringing more people to New Mexico? Here in Las Cruces, one of the things that has driven the economy here has been the increase in the number of people retiring in Las Cruces. And I think if we look at bringing more people to our state, we ultimately then bring more business to our state.
Senator Smith.
You know, it sort of goes back to what I responded before, supply side and percolate up. I think there's an awful lot we can do. We need to bring economic development back to the local level. We need to create jobs. We have a serious situation across the state, but also in local communities on road reconstruction. And that takes money. A dollar of asphalt 24 years ago is now worth 57 cents, and the revenue source has not changed. I would like to see more emphasis with local governments trying to help them with their infrastructure needs to get that payroll out in that particular area. I think that's critically important that we take those initiatives. That will not happen under this administration, but I think it needs to happen.
Okay. Representative Gallegos.
Well, I too believe that we need to work at a local level. I believe that whether it's education, whether it's helping with the Chamber of Commerce, whether it's helping with branch colleges, we need to start at the local level to get people moving in that direction, because if they don't see that there's light at the end of the tunnel, I just don't see that movement happening. And once again, I think tax reform is a big piece of that. I think we have to make ourselves, and I mean New Mexicans and New Mexico, look good to start a business here. And if you have these, you know, all these loopholes for big businesses and small businesses just can't compete, I don't think that gives opportunities for small communities to grow. And we need to really look at that. And we have so much talent here that we can tap into. So that's how I feel.
Okay. Representative Gomez.
What a big question that is. You know, I represent the district that has most of the economic development going on in the state down in Sunland Park and Santa Teresa. And I drive to El Paso a lot of times to get there just because it's quicker. And yet you see the whole difference. Just the imaginary line and the ground, there's a whole difference in economic development across the street. And I just sit there and shake my hand. The only real benefit we're getting now, we're hiring a lot of employees out of El Paso, but you know what's happening? They're moving to Santa Teresa. And you know why? Because we're fixing the roads in El Paso. And so it's a mess if you've been there. So, you know, what does bring about economic development? In that case, we're getting people moving to Santa Teresa because they're tired of the traffic problems. So we need to find ideas that bring people here. We need to create, you know, train people so that we can support these businesses that we need to bring into our state. And until we do that, they won't come. Thank you.
Senator Cervantes.
We have to recognize all of the ideas that have been advanced here too, but we have to recognize that it wasn't that long ago, it was really maybe 8 years or so, that really the economy here locally was booming. About 8 years ago in Las Cruces, we had an explosive housing market. We had a lot of people moving here, a lot of jobs being created in construction, materials, and really the economy in Las Cruces was booming back then. We have to ask ourselves what's changed. Why were things so much better 8 years ago for our local economy than it is today? And I like to start there because it should tell us that we have the potential. We've had the realized potential very recently, and ask ourselves, what have we done to shut down business in this community? And we've done that. We've suppressed and tried to really make things harder for business in this local community, or for growth, or for people to move here and be here. And we need to ask ourselves whether that's where we want to be in the future. The other thing we can do is we need to capitalize on what we have. We have a great environment, we have a great climate, great solar, great potential for renewable energies, and we have a wonderful economy in our farming community here. We should find out what works here, what is going to stay here forever, and it's our environment, it's our farming, it's our beautiful valley, it's our tourism. Those are the things we need to capitalize on locally.
Okay, our next topic is going to be an education question. And the first question is for Senator Smith. Do you support universal preschool education? If so, how would you bring it about?
Well, first and foremost, I was one of the Senate sponsors of full-day kindergarten. So I've had a little experience in that area. One of the things that we did with full-day kindergarten, when we had lots of money in this state, we didn't roll it out overnight. We rolled it out over a 5-year period. What did that allow us to do? It allowed us to train the people at the higher education in early childhood. In addition to that, it allowed us to build the capacity, the capital needs for that. And that was a period when we had plenty of money. We could have thrown it at it overnight, but it wouldn't have been built in a responsible fashion. So early childhood needs to be built in a responsible fashion. And I think a phase-in approach would be a responsible approach.
Thank you. Representative Gallegos.
Yes, I do believe in that, and I believe from 0 to 5, a child's brain is like a sponge, and that we really need to promote their learning. We need to do what we can to make sure they have the tools. We need to make sure they have access to being able to be in a classroom, to be assessed, to start seeing if they're where they're at. We have such an opportunity when they're so young, and there's so many things that stem from that. I mean, we can make assessments on what the home life is like, what kind of services that we can put in there, and so I would like to see us really tap into funding to be able to promote that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you know, I'm here because I opposed my opponent who was trying to hold all the kids back in 3rd grade. I believe that if we have kids and they have problems, we need to get them help. We don't need to punish them. And so I definitely believe in early childhood education, but I also believe that we really need to work with our teachers. You know, I have a little bit of experience with teachers. My wife's a substitute teacher at Las Cruces High School, and she comes home and tells me some of the things that happen there at school, and you wonder, you know, we need to improve the system. We really need to do that. The kids are good. You just need to work with them. You need to connect with them, and you know, early childhood education is very important, and we need to push it, and we need to figure out how to fund it. And I don't know how we're going to do it currently, but we need to work at that. Thank you very much.
Senator Cervantes.
When a bit ago I said that we need a long-term solution and a short-term solution to our economic development needs and job creation, the long-term solution is our education system. And people are not going to bring those big jobs and those great jobs here when they don't see an education system that shows promise to them. I'm happy to say that Jennifer and I have raised 3 daughters through the local public school system. We have one left at Las Cruces High School and the others are off in college. And they had a terrific education locally. They had every opportunity. They had great teachers. Their scores, their education were really second to none in the public schools here locally. So those opportunities exist. We just need to make those opportunities greater to everyone else. I share John's idea that for years now I've sponsored legislation to increase the time on task. More days in school during the school year, shorter summer vacations, more time during the school year so that we can get kids the opportunity to study the things I had the opportunity to study, history, geography, many of the other subjects that we've now dispensed with, just so we can spend more time testing kids and trying to educate them to the test itself, give them the classes that will help them score better on the tests rather than giving them a good broad education.
Thank you. Senator Griggs.
You know, I think that there's a time and a place for some things. The state, the country, you know, how far do we go when it comes to this particular issue? Do we take kids away from parents so they can sit there and learn? Or do we do some things that maybe help the parents to where the parents can then help their kids so their kids are more ready to learn when they get in school? And I believe one of the things that is important to us, and we've been talking about it right now, we've been talking about economic development, economic opportunities. If people have more of those opportunities, they do better, then they can focus on helping their kids do better. If they have to work 2 jobs, 3 jobs, if it's a single family household, those things all challenge the ability of the parent to help the kid. And is it ultimately going to be, is it going to be the state's responsibility to help the child from just almost cradle to grave type stuff, or are we gonna do some things that help the parents help the children?
Okay. We continue now with an environmental question. It's also an economic one, though, too, and one of the most important questions in our region. In fact, a number of years ago, we did a survey, a news survey at KRWG, and this very question really was the number one issue that was on people's minds at that time, a few years ago. How would you allocate increasingly scarce water resources? And we begin with Representative Gallegos.
That's a loaded question because, as we all know, that water is such a sacred resource. And I think we have to really look at how are we going to sustain New Mexico? And you know, we start up north, and it seems like they have a lot more water, than we do down south. And we need to look at making it an equal playing field. We also, I know that we've got treaties with Texas and with Colorado, and it puts us in a bind. But we need to make sure that New Mexicans are getting what they need, and I think we need to fight for that. And I think so many times, you know, it's gone into the legal system, but we really need to really be thoughtful, and because it's such a precious resource, and I think that it's going to become more and more of a battleground if we're not careful.
Representative Gomez.
This is another area I'm very involved with. I spent 3 years running a nonprofit here in this county to fight for our water rights for our farmers with the state engineer, and so far we've won, but you know, the paperwork's now coming out, and I warn everybody in this valley to read those papers carefully because you may lose some water rights. I have to turn down what was sent to me and my wife because it's not right. We need to be careful. And Doreen's right. The north always has more water than we do. We fortunately go to a lot of committees in the north, and I drive across the Rio Grande River, and it's always flowing water of some sort in northern New Mexico. Right here, we have 3 months at the most of water. And somewhere we're not getting our fair share. People get mad because pecan farmers are growing pecans. That's the only crop making any money in this valley. What else can you grow to make a living? If you want to sustain yourself as a farmer, you have to look at where the money is. It takes water, but it's a crop that makes money for our farmers.
Tough issue to be sure, Senator Cervantes.
Well, we've been farming for about 4 generations here, so water is an important part of our daily life. It's important to realize there's not a major city in the West that doesn't bring its water from someplace else. If you take Albuquerque, it gets a majority of its water from Colorado. El Paso, the same. You can take just about any major city in the entire West, even Los Angeles and San Diego. They bring water from someplace else. There's a source, and then it is brought to meet a need. So we need to invest a great deal more in our infrastructure, our ability to deliver water from places where it exists to places where the need is at. We should recognize also, I like to tell people that it was only a few generations ago that Los Angeles was a farm community and a ranch community, and they surrendered that economy to what is now an urban setting. We see it even in El Paso. Our valley is being taken over by buildings and housings and so forth, and we just have to make a conscious decision. Is that where we want to go? Do we want to preserve our agricultural valley and that economy here? And if so, we can do a lot of things, including reducing the per capita, the amount of water that each household uses here. Las Cruces has a long way to go. Santa Fe does a better job. Albuquerque does a better job. Even El Paso does a far better job. Locally, we can do a much better job about reducing local per capita consumption.
Senator Griggs.
You know, over in Alamogordo, I was fortunate enough to be the mayor of the city of Alamogordo for a couple of years, about 4 years ago. Alamogordo is one of the leaders in the country when it comes to conserving water and with use of reclaimed water. And Alamogordo, hopefully in the near future, will desalinate water. Where we are is we've taken those challenges to heart and done what we can do to better utilize our scarce resource. And we're going to have to look at some of those things all across New Mexico. But, you know, as Senator Cervantes talks about, he brings up Los Angeles. What grew Phoenix? If you didn't have the Colorado River Project in Phoenix, you probably wouldn't have Phoenix. So where we are is water's going to be the most critical thing that we face, and we've got to continue to work to develop the responsible use of the water that we have. And if there's ways to utilize other water, we need to be able to look into that as well.
Senator Smith.
You got to remember, we're a population of 2 million people. The question is, how much can we grow on the resources that we have in the way of water? The late Steve Reynolds, state engineer, always made the remark to me that impressed me, was that you got to remember water flows upstream, uphill to money. And I've never forgotten that. I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that. But we've made a lot of progress in conservation. I look at agriculture. I represent Sierra County and Elephant Butte area, and they want a recreational pool. I represent part of Doña Ana County, and they have surface water, and agriculture is critically important. I represent Luna County and Hidalgo County that rely on groundwater. So it's a question that really reflects the fact that we've got a lot of participants, and the challenge is going to be to pull people together collectively to see how we can conserve and preserve the resources that we presently have. But we will not do that if we're at a logjam with one another. We have to work together.
So, taking from that, another challenge, and this question begins with Representative Gomez. Should the state promote renewable energy? If so, how?
We have to promote renewable energy. I mean, we've got the most perfect place in the world right here with all the solar abilities and all the sun that we have. We have wind in many parts of the state that really help to improve our economy. I mean, the big thing is getting these electric lines so we can ship it somewhere else to make the money off of it. And I think you know, we've had some tax rebates, and I think that's great because it does get people to use that. It saves energy. I think it really helps utility companies, even though they're not sure that they're getting help by all these solar panels. But you know, it does help. The more we do, I mean, I personally developed the Roy Moore solar system in my home in the 70s, and it saved me thousands of dollars, and that I can use for other things. So I definitely believe we need to support it. Fortunately, we'll get some more money from oil and gas, and we'll develop some businesses. We can support it better in the future, I hope.
Okay, thank you. Senator Cervantes.
The answer is absolutely. As I said earlier, we have to capitalize on what we have, and what we have are the opportunities for natural resources and renewable energies here in New Mexico. Disappointingly, this administration has suppressed those efforts and has actually vetoed and opposed legislation to try and incentivize through tax credits renewable energies, even at the local and home level. So we need to, I think we need to recognize that it doesn't have to be renewable versus oil and gas, but that's sometimes the way the picture is posed for people. And we need to find a way to make all of our economy work together collaboratively and recognize that we all come up together. I'm happy to say that I think El Paso Electric has done a good job of trying to incorporate renewable energy into their portfolio, and I think they've worked hard to try and reduce their reliance on things like coal resources. So it's possible, but of course it's going to take the government to provide those incentives to make that transition, and we should do a lot more than we're doing.
Thank you. Senator Griggs.
New Mexico is a state that's rich in natural resources. And if we go back, though, we go back and we look at Raton. Raton was rich in coal. Raton was blowing and going until coal stopped being used. The little community Raton has been cut in half by the lack of jobs in Raton because of coal leaving. Grants, which used to be a big uranium mining community. Now Grants is having real trouble because they're trying to move out the prison facility that came to Grants. What we have to be aware of is we have to be aware of the natural resources we have and utilize them in the best possible way. Should we take care or should we utilize solar and wind? Absolutely. But we also need to realize that the cash cow in New Mexico still is oil and gas. And we need to best utilize it to help move forward while we're looking into the ways it can better benefit us with solar and wind.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
You know, in my legislative district, I think I'm the only one in the room that has solar and has wind. I also have hydro in Tier C on that, and I think it's critically important that we continue to develop that. Obviously, the transmission lines are a big issue. You've got Sunzia line and you've got the South line that's plugging along, trying to get authority to move ahead. Those lines are basically for a load that's going to be happening in Arizona and in California. What I don't want to happen is for California, because they're such large customers, to dictate what kind of power that we ship them. And that's a strong possibility. I'm a firm believer in blended generation, and it's done us well historically, and it will do us well in the future. We've got an awful lot of natural gas we have to keep in mind. I would like to add value by having more industry right here in New Mexico, and I don't want to ship all of our solar, all of our wind, and all of our natural gas generation to California.
Thank you. Representative Gallegos.
I think New Mexico is resource rich, and we need to really cultivate that. I'm very much in support of any new buildings that go up, that we definitely put solar panels on there and start utilizing that and capturing that. The one thing I would say is that we need to make sure that it's obtainable to everybody. And I think when I say that, we need to look at it being cost efficient. And so right now I know when we talk about some of the solar panels and some of the new resources, that they seem to still be high for people to be able to obtain those. So we need to bring them down on a cost point, and also look, and we talked about tax incentives. I think if we can utilize those tax incentives to get people to be able to have access.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For our next question, we begin with Senator Cervantes. And how would you improve access to health care, especially mental health care in the state?
Well, we should first recognize that everything that's happened in the last 6 years has been absolutely wrong when it comes down to mental health care. We took local providers who were here for a long time, had a good system in place. The accusation was made from Santa Fe that they were corrupted. The accusation was made and shut them down. They went out of business. We brought in providers from Arizona who couldn't make it. They were here for a short time. They left. We were left without any resources here. And our local experience has been the experience around the entire state. So you don't go in and chase off the system you've got unless you have a good system in place ready to come in and improve things, and that's not what has happened. As a result, we have a real desert, if you will, of mental health care in our local community. Overall, what we need to do is educate and train more doctors. It's great to have the Burrell College now here in Las Cruces, a great new opportunity in our community. That's going to bring a lot of doctors to our local community and train and educate them and hopefully keep them there. It's an easy thing to do, and the opportunities are here to bring us more doctors and with that better health care for everyone.
Senator Griggs.
You know, healthcare is going to be a big issue, even bigger than it is currently. Mental health care is going to be one of those challenges that our state is really going to have to come to grips with. You know, we've had trouble. We have. But now where we are is how do we fix the issues that exist today? And it's going to cost money, it's going to cost doctors, you're going to have doctors. We're going to have to look at things that keep doctors from wanting to be here. And there are numerous things. We talked about tort reform just a little bit ago. It costs doctors to be in New Mexico. So we've got to address some of those underlying conditions to have the people here that can help the people that need to be helped. We passed a bill through the Senate and then through the House, which Senator Papin sponsored, worked very, very hard on. That bill was almost gutted in Senate Judiciary to where it didn't have the effect that initially when it was introduced and had. It was a good bill, but it was wounded. We have to sit there and we have to look at what we're doing and address things in a better way to make things better for the people here in New Mexico.
Senator Smith.
You know, I'd be remiss if I didn't say the real champion for mental health and behavioral health in the New Mexico State Senate is Senator Mary Kay Papin. She had a lot of help from Senator Jennings when he was in the Senate, and they should be applauded. But deficiencies with behavioral health are not just unique to New Mexico. It's pervasive throughout the entire United States. Change has to be made. What I resent the most about what happened with behavioral health providers in our particular area, not only did we interrupt the care that people are in much need of it, but we took out 15 small businesses. We started this discussion on what are we going to do for business. We wiped out 15 businesses in this state, and we still haven't recovered from that. So we've got to put a full court press on behavioral health, but we also have to put a full court press to make certain that behavioral providers can survive in the state of New Mexico.
Representative Gallegos.
You know, this is an area that I'm always very concerned with. Just in my everyday life with working with children, I see that we no longer have the providers that we need to make sure that their mental health is where it should be. You know, we hear about shootings all across the state of New Mexico. We hear about all these violent crimes, but if you look at case by case, what you'll find is most of them, there is mental health and mental illness involved. And whether they aren't receiving care, whether they no longer had access to care, that all becomes a factor. And I think that we need to really examine that. And when all those providers were taken out and there was not a provider that came back in, we had Arizona that came in, but they were not providing the same type of care. People who have mental health issues, they build relationships with their therapist. And to be able to come in and just say, this is your new therapist and we're going to start you on new meds, that doesn't work for that type of population. And there was no consideration given to that population. And I think because so many times they're the unheard voices, and we need to be listening to those voices. And that's one of the I hope one day to be a champion, as Mary Kay Papin has been, because she has been such a champion in that arena, and we need more champions for them.
And Representative Gomez.
You know, everybody's brought up the point. We ran off the good providers. Some of my best friends were working for these companies in town here in Las Cruces and all over the state that were providing great services. Now we're trying to rebuild, and I'm just thankful that in this town we have La Clínica de la Familia. They have 2 clinics in my district. They're wonderful providers for health services in my district, and we need to encourage that, and we need to help them. The other thing we need to look at in this community, we've got to fix that, put that facility we have at the jailhouse into working. It's there. It's all designed to help the mental health problems in this community, the people that get put in jail because they have problems. Yet there it's been, what, 3 or 4 years and hasn't ever been put to use. We need to figure out how to get that facility into use and help people here in this community.
The next question is also a health-related question. Senator Griggs, what are your expectations for Medicaid funding in New Mexico?
I think we need to ask John Arthur Smith. But you know, that is going to be one of the challenges that we face. We saw we were called back into special session because we were short on money. Right. So as Medicaid grows, and if Medicaid, Medicaid's 26% plus or minus of our budget, and if it goes to 30, where does that come from? Did our economy grow enough to cover that, or do we have to go take that money from somewhere else? And if we take it from somewhere else, well, where's the somewhere else? So the challenge with that is we're going to have to address some of it. We're going to have to look at, are there things that we can do with Medicaid, such as co-pays or anything in relation to that, to help with its cost. But the challenge is going to be big. It's not going to go away. It's going to grow, and unless we grow the economy, we're going to have to take that money from some other portion of the state's budget.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
You know, Medicaid, when you look at the federal dollars and the state dollars that go with it to match it, is a larger expenditure than education in the state of New Mexico. There are so many issues when we talk about health care. First and foremost, you have to have the providers. Before the federal program came into play, we knew we had a shortage of nurses. You know, when we lost the College of Nursing here at Doñana, they were decertified. I appreciate New Mexico State stepping to the plate and finally getting that recertified again. But when we talk about it, it's going to take more than money. It's going to have to take an orchestrated effort to make certain that we have the providers. You can give health care away, and if you don't have the providers, you don't have a delivery system. So, you know, that's sort of the situation we're in, but I think we have to methodically build capacity to provide health care in the state of New Mexico, and Burrell is a key player in southern New Mexico.
Thank you. Representative Gallegos.
I also believe in building in capacity. I sit on House Appropriations, and so we have this conversation quite a bit. And one of the things that we have to be very mindful of is that we're looking at matching federal dollars, and so we have to be able to make that match. And so when we need to make certain cuts, we need to look at how that doesn't imbalance what we're doing. We also need to make sure that those who really need the services are getting those services, and being able to have maybe a step system, so people who can pay a little bit can, those who can pay a little bit more pay a little bit more. We need to really look at the system, because right now we have a broken system, and eventually we're not going to be able to continue to pay for it if it goes at this rate. So we need to make sure that our citizens still are healthy, because that's what makes a healthy state and helps them to do well in school. I mean, it's a domino effect of everything that needs to happen, but we need to make sure that we can sustain it.
Thank you. Representative Gomez.
Well, I guess one of the issues is it's going to grow. What are we going to do to take up the growth? You know, this last session we had a nice bill that was proposed in the House to tax the people like Amazon that send all kinds of products into the state. Never got a hearing, nothing happened. You know, other states are doing this. They pass bills. They're not having to sue Amazon. Amazon's paying the taxes. We're losing a lot of income and things like that. We're losing a lot of income on tax rebates that we give, and all kinds of incentives that we have in the state that really don't do anything for the state. They just make people richer. And so we need to look at those things to get the money to do what needs to be done for the state, whether it's education, whether it's Medicare, whatever it is that our citizens need. And we just have to wake up pretty soon and say, we've got to bite the bullet. We have to go find new funding sources. Oil and gas ain't going to save us the rest of our lives.
Thank you. Senator Cervantes.
Well, recently, historically, New Mexico has been aggressive about trying to enroll more and more people into these programs, in part because, as John pointed out, there's a great deal of federal contribution and component to the match of that. So for $1 that New Mexico might spend on healthcare, the federal government in these programs will then match that by multiples or 3 or 4 times. And so New Mexico has recognized that there's value in having that partnership with the federal government. The problem, of course, is the federal government is beginning to shrink that contribution level, and that puts an increasing burden on those we've already enrolled, committed to the system, and then trying to break up the federal match or what's declining in the federal match. The one thing that hasn't been discussed by my colleagues, I think, is important for us to remember as well, too, is the national level and locally, there needs to be a greater effort to prevent the need for health care. We need to get healthier in our preventative care. We need to give doctors and hospitals a greater incentive to make sure that people do not need emergency care and not seeing those expensive services, but are really being on the lookout for the contributing factors, weight, and other diet matters that will make us a healthier community and have a lesser reliance on those services. And that's true throughout our state of New Mexico.
Okay, I believe we have time for one more question, and this is a very interesting one. Are you in favor of a professional legislature with legislators being paid a salary, yes or no, and why? And we begin with Senator Smith.
That's hardly a fair question. I've served in the legislature longer than anybody here. I'm fixing to start my 29th year, but for my family, I would not have served this long. I run my own business. My wife helps me. She's a retired educator on that, and I know the time that I put into this job. Just this last legislative session, when everybody was wondering what's going on, there was a few of us that were doing an awful lot of heavy lifting long before the session was ever called. And it was a little concerning to me when the executive said nothing's being done. I know for a fact I was working in a bipartisan fashion, and the numbers on the Senate side reflect that those efforts and that time that I put into this elected position paid off for the New Mexico State Senate, because things moved smoothly on the New Mexico State Senate. But I prefer right now, because I would not be a beneficiary of a paid position on that, and so as a result, I'm obviously happy with what we have.
Okay, and we should remind everyone that our questions did come from the public. They were submitted to the league by the public. This question in particular brought up in another one of our forums, because it was actually proposed as legislation by Representative Terry McMillan. And we continue now with the answer to this question of whether or not you're in favor of a paid legislators being paid a salary, with Representative Gallegos.
Well, you know, I always joke, and I think that to be a legislator, sometimes you are either rich, retired, or resourceful. And I consider myself resourceful. And, you know, I would like to think that we have the best representation, but sometimes people who have not retired or are still having to raise families and work up to retirement have to have a job. And I know that as an executive director for a nonprofit, had I not had a board that was willing to let me take a month or 2 months off and still have my job, not many employers are willing to do that. And so I think that we have to examine some of that. And I know that we get paid reimbursement, and you know, there are some of those, I don't want to say incentives, but there are those reimbursements. But I don't know that it's enough at times, because I think it is a heavy lift. And for many times, you know, to get younger people involved, you know, we talk about really wanting to make sure that government is open to everybody. But unless you have those resources, how do you do that?
Okay.
And so that's...
Representative Gomez.
Well, I'll give you an example. The first year I went into office, I worked 141 days on the road. That was at meetings or travel to committee meetings or being in the legislature. When I worked at New Mexico State University, 200 days was a full-time job. I put in 200 days of full-time job because I'm in my district. I was in my district this evening. I was at a crew board meeting. I'll be in my district basically on Friday because I'm going to be representing my district at the MPO in El Paso, trying to bring money for our highways in that area. So, yes, I think people should be paid something. You go to Texas, they get a salary and they get 2 assistants, full-time employees for all year. And I know it because I see them at our meetings at the MPO when they come in. And so I think we're at a disadvantage. Our clients here, our people are at a disadvantage because my resources is me and my wife and my cell phone. That's all you get.
Okay.
And so that's basically how I feel. Thank you.
Senator Cervantes.
The structure of our state government goes back to about 1912. We haven't really changed the way we do things in well over a century now. For years, I proposed legislation to relook at our constitutional process, how we have a citizen legislature, how we meet for 1 month out of the year, every other year, and so forth. We ought to be looking at best practices, and we ought to be studying what other states do that provides for the best form of representation in state government. And we should be willing to really shake loose of the shackles that are a century old, where we used to be farmers and ranchers as a state, and we'd go to Santa Fe in the wintertime when there was not much else going on to do. We should rethink the entire process. Right now, I don't favor a paid legislature, but we should be looking at what other states do and see what works best and see what may give us a better form of government. Where I do think that we're short is the fact that we don't have any staff, we don't have any resources during the year, we don't have offices. It would be, I think, to the citizens' benefit if we were able to have people that could help us as staff to do greater research and find more information between sessions and do a better job of governing.
And Senator Griggs, you take us home.
All right, you guys. Again, I'll go back to my time as mayor of Alamogordo. I served on the Alamogordo City Commission for 12 and a half years. I made $100 a month. And of course, I was $50 for every regular meeting. If I didn't make one of the meetings, well, I didn't get that. So we changed that right before I left government in Alamogordo. And we paid the city commissioners, and we pay them now. I'm not sure that that's really benefited the community yet, to know whether that's been something that has improved the people who come to the legislature or to the city commission. I think that what it does do, if you do pay the legislature, is it gives you a bigger pool to choose from for people to consider the service, because there's a lot of guys that just can't take the time away from their business, their job, in order to do that. So I think that's the benefit, but I'm not sure that it's really that great a benefit.
Okay, senators and representatives, thank you all for being with us. Really appreciate the discussion about all these important issues, and KRWG very much appreciates the League of Women Voters for helping us in this busy election season.
Yes, and on behalf of the League of Women Voters, thank you for your willingness to participate. I know that your time is valuable. And to all of the candidates who have participated in many candidate forums this year, and to KRWG and Fred Martino for hosting us this year. It has been a real pleasure.
It's
and
been
we
a pleasure
really,
for us too.
really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you as well. And thank you to all of you at home. Have a great week.